Welcome back. Now, we had some problems filming this next segment. I have two cameras set up, and one of them kind of just stopped working, and the other was a little haunted. One of the microphones didn't work right. So, although you'll hear my dad just fine, sometimes it's a little hard to hear me. I pumped up the volume in areas I could. We're going to start with a segment I should have put in the last chapter. Technically, in the book, it's in the last chapter. And it's with my spare camera, so you really won't see Ray really looking at the camera a whole lot. But it was important, and it was the only way it got on film. The other camera had died, and I think it was still worth putting in. So we're going to start with that segment, and then we're going to jump over to Chapter 4. We talk about trains, buses, and smelly cheese. You travel to New York each year at Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving. Now, for my generation, trains were kind of on their way out. It's kind of, once, if you ask someone who's 40 if they've ever been on a train, most likely no, unless it's like the metro.
Yeah.
Or very few people have taken a train. But in your time, it was a pretty big way of life as a kid, right?
Oh, it was
buses?
a big deal. First of all, as I said earlier, my parents did not drive. We didn't have a car. Second, you didn't fly from city to city in the 1940s, the late 40s, or early 50s, and so you either drove, which we didn't have a car, or you took the train. Trains were huge in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in this country. They became neglected in the 50s and 60s and to their current state, which is really sad. If you've traveled in many countries, you know this is probably the worst train system that you'll ever find in the United States, what's left of it. But it was a very big deal. And I love the train. I love walking down to Penn Station, which is still probably the most beautiful building in Washington, at least the inside of it. And hearing the trains go as they were just sitting there, letting off steam by the wheels. And then when they start to back up, you know, you see the wheels turning around and then hear that sound. Still one of the great sounds of my life, just listening to a steam train. And when I get a chance, even today, years later, when I hear a steam train is running for a celebration or memorial, I'll try to go and take a picture of it and hear it. It's just an amazing sound. So as a kid, that was huge. Bigger than traveling on a train or plane or anything like that it would have been to a kid today, I think.
And that was one of your prized toys, right? Or your train collections as a kid.
Yeah.
Now, what age did you start getting into collecting trains?
Well, I think, you know, in terms of collecting it, I got my train set somewhere around 8 or 9. And every Christmas after that, you take it out, set it up. Later on, when I had children, in the first several years of their lives, I'd set up that same train set.
At Christmas?
At Christmas time. And then even today, years later, when I had grandchildren, I've given the grandsons a train around their 6th or 7th birthday. Even though they're not a big thing, I think every kid likes to, at certainly that age, like to watch the train go around, wonder if it's going to leave the tracks and break something.
Yeah, it's fun to play with trains.
It is. It is.
I mean, it's sad that like a lot of the fun is derailing them, but it's still fun.
Yeah.
Or putting
that's pretty typical.
Putting things on the track to run over.
Kids to do, you know.
Yeah, that's
what
it.
2 or 3-year-old doesn't pick up anything to throw it to break it? It's part of the tradition.
Since your parents were, as you said, pretty broke, how did you get big presents like that? Was that a huge deal to get a train set?
It was a huge deal, and it was my only
present. Gift. Yeah, that's how Christmas worked. Was one gift.
One gift, much. Yeah, and I got it. It was handed to me in New York, visiting my grandparents. It was under the tree. I don't know how they got it there. They probably bought it at Macy's, and then we brought it back on the train ride back, and that was it.
And so what was Christmas time like growing up? I imagine it wasn't a production like it is now. It was probably, you're talking about an Italian family. I assume there was some church stuff you did, or...
Well, it's interesting. To me, it was not fun, because we'd go to New York to be with my mother's family one year, my father's family the other, And these were older Italian people who spoke in Italian, and I was the only kid there. So Christmas morning, I'm looking under the tree, and sometimes I could see that there was a gift for me. Sometimes I didn't, but there was a gift. There was always a gift. I just couldn't see it. So I'd sit there waiting for them to say, "Well, let's go open the gifts." It'd be noon. They're in there.
They're having coffee.
They're having coffee, and they're talking about everything. And you know, I'm 7 or 8 years old, and
oh my gosh!
Yeah, so finally I got to open the gift. So it was not like kids today when they're given 20, 30, 40 toys and made a big deal that Santa's coming and all that. So I'm not saying Christmas wasn't nice, and of course there came a time later on in my teens when we were home for Christmas, and that was quite different. That was much nicer. The other thing that I remember was my uncle taking me to the Catholic church that was in Greenwich Village on a Sunday, on one of the Christmases. And to me, it was all mystery. You know, seeing these guys walking down the aisle with smoke coming out of this.
Yeah, swinging the incense.
Swinging this thing, and then this basket passing back and forth. Seemed like 100 times, you know, for money. And it was all spoken in Latin. It's like they didn't want you to know what they were saying. They were probably saying something like, "See that kid down there who's falling asleep? His name's Lupo." You know, something like that. Anyway, so I guess I had gotten old enough to kind of think about things like this. I asked my uncle, I said, "Why do you go to church at Christmas?" He said, "I don't see you go any other time." He says, "I don't go any other time, except Easter." And I said, "Why just those 2 times?" And he says, I want to cover my bets. I'm not real religious, but I want to make sure, I'm using my words now, I want to make sure that if there's a God up there, he knows I showed up a couple of times a year to say hi.
That's it. A lot of people have that strategy where they just decide to repent on their deathbed. Otherwise,
absolutely.
I'll just accept it when I die.
Yeah, I want to cover my bet. I'll double down.
Double down with Jesus. We're going to move on to chapter 4.
Okay.
Dunloring years from 6th grade through high school. It says, learning that I was moving to the country. So you guys, you pretty much, I guess you always talk about walking everywhere, and you were pretty much in the city most everything, and then you move all the way out to Dunloring, which is, well, it used to be rural farmland, right?
Yeah, it was all farmland. We moved to an old shack that my dad was going to basically gut and build a house connected to it. And it was at the intersection of Gallows Road, then called Dunloring Road, and Idlewood Road, right across from a school. I was not happy about this because, you know, my friends were in Arlington. I played softball there in the summertime in the playground, and I actually, you know, went out to this place where there were no homes around there. You had to walk 2 or 3 blocks to even find a home. Somebody took me to introduce me to a kid who lived 2 or 3 blocks away, and to try to, you know, give me somebody to make contact with. Meanwhile, the house was going to be built piece by piece, and in fact, when we moved into that house, it didn't even have an inside bathroom. The couple had owned it before. The Hosses used an outhouse. So here it was, when we finally moved, it was, I guess...
You said you started the construction in 1950. But why did they move? Did your dad like decide, hey, I'm going to be a farmer and go out to the country? I mean...
No, I think it was more that, you know, there were city people, and for whatever reason, they both had the idea it would be nice to live in the country. And although they were only moving a total distance of maybe 12 miles, 16 miles, they moved from an urban area to absolute farmland. And in fact, their 6-acre lot was one of the smallest lots on the road that we lived on. It was crazy because they had no money, but he got a good buy on it, I guess. And it was a shock. So, from that time on, I lost all the connections that I had in Arlington as a kid. I guess that happens to everybody who moves when they're a kid. And the search for new friends and a new school system. Fairfax County, compared to Arlington County, at that time, the classroom was entirely different. They had something called a cafeteria, which was amazing because the Arlington schools didn't. And that was because a lot of the kids came from distant locations, and I don't know. But it was really like a farm place. Correct.
So tell me, the construction begins in 1950 and it goes quite a few years. You're living in this house under construction.
Correct, for 8 years.
And tell me about the actual construction, because your dad's an engineer. I assume he drew up his own plans and made his own house.
He also had one of his 3 engineering degrees was in architectural engineering, which I don't even think exists today. I don't know. But he drew the plans for the house, and I guess his hobby, or his wannabe hobby, was carpentry. And he built 90% of that house. The other 10% was a carpenter that did occasional difficult stuff that Dad needed help. Or me in my teen years, I helped some. I don't want to make it sound like I helped a lot, but I did help. It took that long because they didn't have any money. And they were working off of a government salary. Following the Depression, I might add, the salaries weren't that high. And he would borrow money from the credit union to buy lumber, whatever he needed, and work on one room. And then he'd pay off, as he paid off that loan, then he'd take another loan and work on another room. And it literally took 8 years before it was complete. So it was quite a project, and I think my dad enjoyed the exercise. It's kind of interesting looking back on it because I don't think he ever had a physical sport in his life. I know he didn't. And this was some intense exercise, out there in the sun on the weekends.
Well, the whole majority of the house is stone. So
yes.
Where did you guys get these stones from?
They were from 7 states, and my dad wanted to find a good stonemason to do them. And the Fimiani brothers were recommended to him, and they had done some of the work on the National Cathedral. So they were also Italian, they spoke Italian, my dad spoke Italian, and it was a connection. They drove around to a bunch of houses and looking at different stones and picked stones that basically came from 7 different states. And how they knew that, I don't know. But that's what I was told.
And so he hired these Italian stonecutters.
Yes.
Do you remember them?
Yeah. They were quite a trip. They were not just the 2 brothers, but they had a couple workers, and they would come early in the morning, like most workers do. Again, this is all new experience to me at about 9 or 10 when it started. And they would take a stone, hold it in their hand, look at the spade as it had to go, and just with a chop, would chop it in each of 4 ways. And
why they're holding it? They're just
why they're holding it. And they'd flip it. I mean, these are heavy stones. These guys were very muscular. That's all they did, I guess. And they'd cut it and then set it in. And probably, I'm guessing, 70–80% of the time, it fit exactly. When it didn't fit quite exactly, they'd do a little more trimming, and then they'd put on the cement and stick it in. It was really an amazing process. What I used to do is kind of watch them with curiosity, and one of the stories I think I tell in the book was being in the window above where they were lunching. The or on the scaffold, I should say, above where they were lunching. And the typical lunch that they would bring was a loaf of Italian bread, some salami that they'd bite off or cut off and chew, and wine. And, you know, no problem for them to have wine while you're working. So it was just fun to watch. And they'd be talking in Italian. I had no idea what they were talking about. But every once in a while they'd burst out laughing as they were pointing to one of them and saying probably something, one of his inadequacies, making up an inadequacy.
So I thought you spoke Italian. Do you not? Well,
I speak some Italian that I studied some briefly before I went to Italy in 1985. Studied it a few times before a couple other Italian trips. And if I'm there 3 or 4 days, I speak enough without the books in my hands.
Your parents are both off the boat. How did you not speak Italian? I mean, wasn't it in the house all day long?
Not all day long. They spoke English. They wanted me to be an American boy. And when they did speak Italian, it was usually because they didn't want me to know what they were saying. Probably something about me, you know. Got to get him to school tomorrow, or got to get him to study tonight, or whatever. But no, and my parents are fantastic people. And there's only one thing that I can say about them that I regret, and that's that they didn't teach me Italian, or didn't, you know, like I see Tony and Jean. The first thing they did with their children is teach them Chinese, because they knew once they go to school and they'd only hear English. And so their children, by the age of 2, 3, were very fluent in both English and Chinese. And I wish my parents had done that with me. But the other side of it is I understand that why they didn't, because there was a lot of bigotry against, especially in Northern Virginia, or in Virginia and all of the South, I suppose, against Italians, Jews, blacks, whatever. And we were Italian. And, you know, there were instances when my parents were called WAP and things like that. And so I think they wanted me to look like an American kid so that I might have less of that experience. So they really pushed away from me learning Italian, and it was probably for that reason.
And your dad was highly educated, right? Like, tell me
Well,
about
he had 3 engineering degrees. He got all of them at night. He did all of his schooling at night.
And he spoke multiple languages.
And he spoke either 4 or 5 languages. I think 5.
How did he learn all this?
Beats me. Beats me, you know. All of that was done before I was born. Maybe during the Depression, I'm guessing, that he had time to do things like that, study it. And
you said, yeah, he was unemployed for a number of years. Maybe he just kept educating himself.
He was unemployed for 8 years and lived with his dad. And just, you know, think about what it'd be like for you and your. Oh well, I was asking you. I got an answer different than what I thought. No. I was saying, think of what it'd be like to be in your 30s, in your 30s, and having to live with your dad, who was also at that time, and actually for the rest of his life, a single person, because after his wife died, he never remarried.
You're talking about your grandfather? My
grandfather, yes.
And your mom's education?
My mom's education was music. She went to the New York College of Music and studied piano. And in fact, I think her graduation concert was at Carnegie Hall. She had to perform her number at Carnegie Hall with the other students who graduated from that class. So
what did she end up doing with her music degree?
Well, after I was born, she taught music and had students, as many as 25 or 30, when we lived in Dunloring, to make a few extra dollars to help. Because
did she play for enjoyment too? Did you ever just catch her sitting down playing for fun?
That's a good question. I think there were probably 1 or 2 times that I remember where I saw her playing for fun. Otherwise, she was always playing because somebody asked her, or she was teaching a lesson.
What did she like playing?
Very good, very good.
No, what did she like?
Oh, what kind of music? Classical.
She was a classical.
Yeah, I mean, she was trained on classical music. I mean, she played, of course, all kinds, but that was what she was trained on.
Did you ever see her do like rock music or boogie woogie or jazz or something that
No, in
was
fact,
out of character?
no, she saw me do that.
Did she get mad? She's like,
Yeah, I mean, I think
"You can't play like that."
she enjoyed seeing me come in there and play try to work out something that Ray Charles or Little Richard was doing at the time. You know, I'm 14, 15, 16, and you know, I could play some of that. So,
That's pretty
but I never saw her play. No. You know, I think that she was smart enough to recognize that let the kid go where he wants to go. You know, as long as he's. My parents were always like that. You know, always told me I could do anything I wanted to do, which I think is what I told you guys as you were growing up,
You're
and my
very
daughters,
encouraging.
and my daughters too. You
You
know,
were never one of those jerk dads that was like, "You have to do what I
No.
think is best for you."
No.
You were always cool because I've done totally crazy stuff for 20 years, and you've always been supportive. So I appreciate that.
Well, you know, you got to make your way through life, so it's the way it is. You might not be happy. You only got it once. Or your mess may not be true, by the way. You may have many lives, but you only have this life, the one you're living today, once.
We kind of got off on a tangent about the parents, but let's get back to the house. We hadn't finished that. There's some really good pictures of when it was finished, and it was quite beautiful. There's a lot of Roman features I noticed. You have like pergolas and statues, and tell me about that.
Well, the pergola down at the bottom of the hill there in the book was there when we moved in. The thing that really attracted my parents, they loved garden and flowers wherever they lived, whether it was Glebe Road or the first house. They had little gardens. And this house had a beautiful garden. It had a shack for the people that lived in it. It was a shack. And yet it had a beautiful little garden. And it was on the front page of the Washington Star magazine. Prior to my parents purchasing it, they didn't know that. But when years later somebody gave them a picture from the Star and it was framed. So they didn't build that. But they built the house. They built the patio. They built what you see around the stone around the tree here near the house. And that pergola down in the garden was here before.
And they put all the stone on the porch.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, so tell me about. Well, actually, before we start this, let's get into what you brought up before. We were never brought up religious, and we had talked about it a little before. But honestly, I don't know what you believe, and we've never talked about it as a family. So, are you comfortable talking about religion?
Of course. The first thing that is to give a definition of religion, so you understand what I'm talking about. If the definition of religion means belonging to a particular religion, such as Catholic, Jewish, Baptist, I have very little to say about it. I don't find anything particularly favorable in any of that, other than if it makes people comfortable with what they're doing with their lives, and they don't do it with harming anybody else, it's a wonderful thing. But it's not a wonderful thing if it has for so many times over centuries led to the killing of others who do not believe in the same thing. And if that's what organized religion is, it's really quite horrible. So when I talk about religion, do I believe in religion? Yes. I believe in the spiritual side of religion, that there's a reason we're all here. Whether you want to say that it's a collection of electrons in the universe, as some people think now, whether there's a spiritual second being, whether you want to think that that tree outside is God. That's your belief, and you're entitled to it, and it's wonderful you have it. And if it helps you in any way, as long as you don't harm somebody else in having it, it's a wonderful thing. So getting back to having children and not encouraging them necessarily to go to particular churches, that just happened. And I used to say to your mom, and I think she agreed, that let the children be old enough to search it on their own and choose whatever religion or non-religion that they want. And by that, if your child turns out to be an agnostic, an atheist, a Catholic, a Jew, a Unitarian, that's for them. Again, as I said.
I mean, we kind of covered that a little before, but I don't really know what you believe. Do you believe in reincarnation? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in just like a force? What do you believe in?
Yeah, belief is an important word because none of us have any evidence of what happens later. We have beliefs. And I think that what I see of prodigies that are born, children who are 4, 5, 6 writing symphonies, like you see occasionally on 60 Minutes, or mathematicians at the age of 8 who are just brilliant, or those that seem to be able to say what they haven't even been exposed to, just understand it. I think that there are probably several lives, many lives maybe, that all of us live. So that's a belief of mine. I have no proof of that, and no one else has proof. We have instances where we can say it appears to be the case, but we don't know. So,
you think I was your dad one time?
I think that's a possibility.
That's awesome.
No, it's certainly a possibility, and I think that Debbie and I strongly believe that we've met each other in an earlier life. Do we have any proof of that? Absolutely not.
No, but it's stuff you can feel.
Yeah.
I think people get so hung up on science and studies and proof, and I have to see it. And it's like you can feel religion. You don't have to. It's almost like, here's an example. If you have, can you prove someone has a headache? There's no X-ray you can take to show a headache. There's no test I can prove that's out that shows you have a headache. But you have a headache. You feel it. You know it. Everybody understands you have a headache. Religion's kind of you feel it. You know when you have a spiritual experience. I think that yes, I can't prove it, but everybody else has felt. You know,
Yeah.
A lot of people have felt it. Like, I guess it's the same as a headache. It's just as real to me.
Well, yeah, and actually, it's one of those things that we spend time on that really doesn't in any way make a difference when we die, or before we die. And it's something, if it makes you feel better, that's good. H.L. Mencken wrote a book called Treatise of the Gods. He wasn't the first, and he won't be the last. That basically says all religions, all gods were created by man, not man being created by gods. The concept of a god is a man-made, generic-made concept to probably make us feel comfortable as we approach death, that there's a heaven waiting for us. But you know, I could point to the Bible and all the awful stories it tells about what God will do to you if you're not nice, and what he did to his son, and all of that. It just doesn't make sense to me. You don't sacrifice your child for the sins of others. You know, that makes no sense to me. It doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong, and I'm very happy for people who believe that story. But I do believe that there was a teacher named Christ who taught absolutely fabulous things, including the Golden Rule. And many religions have golden rules, and that's a good thing.
Do you think there's an afterlife?
I think there's a strong probability, not just an afterlife, I think there's many afterlives. I think there are many lives. Now, again, I come back. Do I have any proof of that? Absolutely not. But just to put a little framework on this, when I was 16 or 17, something terrible happened to some kid. I think he had one of these things where you bleed all the time, and he died. And somehow we're talking to my dad about that at 16. He said, well, you believe in God, don't you? And I said, it's irrelevant. God's irrelevant. Whether I believe or not, or whether there is a God, it's irrelevant. And he asked me, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, because if there's a God who permits a child to be born with cancer or some awful disease, or has people who have so-called sinned, run over by cars or this or that, then that's a God who's not nice. If there's a God who has no control over that, then that's a God that
why worry about that God? Because he has no control over what's going to happen to any of us. So, point is, the concept of God becomes irrelevant. What does become relevant is how you enjoy this life and how you treat others. And that's a fundamental in many, one of the good things about organized religions, almost all of them have that idea. And that's good. So there are good things in organized religions, but they're not for me. The religions are not for me, not the good things are for me.
Have you ever had a spiritual experience or something that you've seen that you can't explain, or some miracle? Has anything ever happened in your life like that?
Well, again, we have to talk about who's defining miracle. If it's a church, it's one thing, and they'd say probably not. If it's me, the main fact that I survived the accident I had and regained maybe 85% of what I was before when my brain was smashed into the car is a miracle for me, a miracle for me. And, certainly recognizing all those, especially Debbie and Tony and you and family that helped me through that with great patience. But if I want to say, has there been a miracle in your life that you would define as a miracle? I think that might be one.
All right, let's take it a little further down the rabbit hole. Do you believe in things like ghosts or aliens or anything that spirits we can't see, demons, whatever?
Everything is possible. And there are certainly instances that give certain weak evidence, but evidence that there may be ghosts. And as far as aliens, the whole UFO thing is potential proof of the existence of other cultures, whether you want to call them aliens or not. And the whole story about the UFOs over the Washington, D.C. area for 3 nights back in 1954, I think.
You were there.
Coming across all the radars of from the airports and the jet planes going up to try to interfere with them and never being able to catch them. And there has never been a valid explanation for what thousands and thousands and thousands of people witnessed that weekend. So, that there may be a lot of hokum pokum about other UFO sightings, but not that one.
And do you remember that being a big story? Like, you were probably in your teens when that happened.
Yeah, I do remember it. In fact, it got me interested. And now that I think about it, my friend Kim Stevens, who I was in high school with, had a neighbor, Donald Keogh, I think was his name, who was a retired Air Force general, maybe, wrote a book about unidentified flying objects. And I got him to autograph it. And I read that book. I was very interested. And of course, part of it was directed to what happened in Washington. And his premise was the Air Force was, hiding the story about whether there were UFOs or not. And who knows? The government does crazy stuff. Yeah. And then I have Jerry, my current father-in-law now, who is as straight and truthful as he can be, who absolutely swears and can describe in great detail his encounter from his apartment.
Like I said in the beginning of this, we were plagued with all kinds of problems. The camera died during this UFO interview part. And basically what he said was, his father-in-law is a straight shooter, ex-pilot, who told him about some UFOs. Now, I actually talked to Jerry directly years ago, and he told me that the UFOs he saw were like the size of football fields that came directly into the Air Force base and sat there for a couple minutes. And it happened twice. And they made all the pilots and everybody worked there sign disclosures saying to never talk about it. So that's what happened with that story. Anyway, this chapter ended up getting really long again, so I'm cutting it up into 2 parts. That's the end of the first part of chapter 4, and I will start the second one soon. It should just autoplay if I finished it. Thanks.